A blistering Wyoming sun beat down on the woman who refused to die. She had no shoes left that mattered, no husband breathing, no mercy from the world, just 7 children crying behind her and a wagon with a shattered axle that screamed with every inch she dragged it forward. Blood seeped through the rags wrapped around her feet. Her lips were cracked white. Her hands were raw meat. And still, Mara Ellington would not stop. Because the moment she stopped, they would take her children. Then a shadow fell across the trail. A man on horseback, silent as a ghost, watching her like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. This is the story of a woman the world tried to break, and the stranger who became her salvation. Stay with me until the end. Comment where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Wyoming Territory had no patience for weakness. It was late October 1884, and the land stretched out in all directions like a vast, indifferent ocean of dirt and sage. The kind of emptiness that swallowed hope whole, the kind of silence that made you hear your own heartbeat like a countdown. Mara Ellington had been walking for 3 days. 3 days since the banker's men had nailed the eviction notice to her door. 3 days since they'd taken the horses, the furniture, the last tin of beans. 3 days since she'd loaded everything that remained of her life into a wagon meant to be pulled by animals she no longer owned, and decided she would pull it herself, because her children had no one else. Her eldest, Jonah, was only 12, strong for his age, wiry and dark-haired like his father had been, but still a child. He walked beside her now, his small hands gripping the wagon's edge, trying to help push even though his arms shook with exhaustion. Behind them, in the wagon bed, 6 more children huddled together like wounded birds. Eliza, 10 years old, held the baby. 8-month-old Samuel, who had stopped crying hours ago and now just stared at the sky with glassy, hollow eyes. Twins Clara and Catherine, age 7, clung to each other, their matching braids filthy with road dust. 5-year-old Thomas had his thumb in his mouth, something he hadn't done in 2 years. And little Abigail, just 3, lay curled in Eliza's lap, whimpering softly. Mara's husband, Daniel, had been dead for 10 days. A logging accident, a tree that fell the wrong way, a body they'd buried in a pine box so cheap the lid didn't quite close. No insurance, no savings, just a mountain of debt she'd never known existed, debt that came crashing down the moment they lowered him into the ground. The banker, Mr. Hutchins, had been apologetic but firm. "Mrs. Ellington, I sympathize with your situation, truly I do. But your husband owed this bank $473. The property is collateral. I have no choice but to foreclose." She'd begged, got down on her knees in that polished office and begged, "Please, just give me time. I can work. I can sew. I can cook. I can—" "Ma'am, there's no work in this county for a woman with 7 children. You need to make arrangements. Perhaps family back east?" "I have no family." "Then I'm very sorry." He wasn't. So she'd packed what little they had left, 3 dresses, a quilt, a cast-iron pot, a Bible, and the small wooden horse Daniel had carved for Jonah's 5th birthday, and she started walking. The plan, if you could call it that, was to reach Fort Bridger, 80 miles south. There was a missionary group there. They helped destitute families. Or so she'd heard. 80 miles. She'd made it maybe 20. The wagon's axle had cracked on the 2nd day. She tried to fix it with rope and prayers, but it dragged now, lopsided and screeching, chewing through what little strength she had left. Her feet were bleeding. The rags she'd wrapped them in were soaked through, brown and stiff. Every step was a negotiation with agony. Every breath was a fight against the urge to just lie down in the road and let the buzzards have her. But she wouldn't, because if I stop, they'll take them. Daniel's brother, Thomas Avery, had made that very clear at the funeral. "Mara, you can't possibly think you can raise 7 children alone. Be reasonable. Let me take the boys. I'll find families for the girls. Good Christian families." Translation: he'd sell them, indenture them, scatter them like seeds to the wind, and she'd never see them again. "No." "Mara, see?" I said no. He'd smiled then, cold and thin. "We'll see." So she ran, took the children and ran before he could file papers, before he could convince a judge she was unfit, before the law could rip her family apart with the stroke of a pen. And now here she was, broken, bleeding, dragging a wagon through hell because stopping meant surrender. "Mama," Jonah said quietly beside her, his voice cracked. "Mama, please. You need to rest." "We're almost there," she lied. "We're not. You know we're not." She didn't answer, just leaned harder into the rope harness she'd tied around her shoulders, the fibers cutting into her collarbone like knives. The sun hammered down. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a pale scar through the sagebrush. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled. Mara's vision was starting to blur at the edges. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. She could taste blood in her mouth. She'd bitten her tongue at some point and hadn't noticed. "Mama," Eliza called from the wagon, her voice high and frightened. "Mama, the baby won't wake up." Mara's heart lurched. She stopped, turned, stumbled to the wagon's side. Samuel lay in Eliza's arms, limp and pale. His eyes were closed. His chest barely moved. "No, no, no, no." Mara grabbed him, pressed her ear to his tiny chest. There. Faint, but there. A heartbeat. "Water," she gasped. "Eliza, the canteen. It's empty, Mama. It's been empty since this morning." Of course it was. Mara cradled Samuel against her chest, rocking him, whispering desperately, "Stay with me, baby. Stay with me. We're almost there. We're almost—" She was lying to a dying infant. The realization hit her like a fist to the stomach. "I'm going to lose him. I'm going to lose all of them." "Mama, what do we do?" Clara's voice, small and terrified. Mara opened her mouth to answer, though she had no answer, and that's when Jonah's hand gripped her arm. "Mama, someone's coming." She looked up, a figure on horseback cresting the ridge to the west, silhouetted against the brutal sky, unmoving, watching them. Mara's blood went cold. In this part of Wyoming, a lone rider could mean anything. Drifter. Outlaw. Worse. She pulled Samuel closer, stepped in front of the wagon, putting her body between her children and whatever was coming. The rider didn't move. Just sat there, high on the ridge, still as a statue. Then, slowly, he started down the slope toward them. Mara's hand found the handle of Daniel's old skinning knife tucked into her belt. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. The children went silent behind her. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The rider grew closer, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. Dark coat. Dark horse. No visible weapons, but that didn't mean anything. He stopped about 20 feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Mara's hand tightened on the knife. Her voice came out hoarse, barely more than a rasp. "Stay back." The man tilted his head slightly. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he dismounted, kept his hands visible, took 2 steps forward and stopped again. "Ma'am," he said quietly. His voice was low, rough-edged, but not unkind. "You need help." "We're fine." "You're not." Mara's knees were shaking. She could feel herself swaying. "I said we're fine. Just leave us alone." The man's gaze moved past her to the wagon, to the children, to the broken axle, to Samuel, limp in her arms. His jaw tightened. "How long since that baby's had water?" "That's none of your—" "How long?" Mara's breath hitched. I don't know. Hours. Maybe longer." Without a word, the man turned back to his horse, reached into his saddlebag, and pulled out a canteen. He walked forward, slow, non-threatening, and held it out. Mara stared at it like it might be poison. "It's just water," the man said. "For the baby." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to go to hell, wanted to prove she didn't need anyone. But Samuel's lips were cracked and bleeding. Her hand shook as she took the canteen. She unscrewed the cap, wet her finger, touched it to Samuel's lips. He stirred faintly, instinctively sucking at the moisture. She gave him a little more, then a little more, until his eyes fluttered open and he started to cry, weak but alive. A sob tore out of Mara's chest before she could stop it. The man stood there, hands at his sides, saying nothing. Mara passed the canteen back to Eliza. "Give everyone a sip, just a little." Then she turned back to the stranger, wiping her face roughly. Thank you, but we don't need charity. We're fine. The man glanced at the wagon, at the broken axle, at her bleeding feet. No, ma'am, you're not. We'll manage. You won't. We will, ma'am. His voice was still quiet, but there was iron underneath. That axle split clean through. You've got no water, no food, and no horses. The nearest town is 40 miles back and Fort Bridger's 60 miles ahead. You won't make it another day, let alone both. Mara's hands clenched into fists. Then what do you suggest? You want to take my children? Is that it? You're working for Thomas Avery? The man frowned. I don't know who that is. Then what do you want? Silence. The man looked at her for a long moment, then quietly, to help. Why? Because you need it. Mara laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. People don't just help, not without wanting something. The man's expression didn't change. I do. She searched his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the trap. She didn't find one. I don't even know your name, she whispered. Silas Hawthorne. I'm Mara Ellington. Silas nodded once. Then he knelt down beside the wagon, ran his hand along the broken axle, and stood. I can fix this. Won't be pretty, but it'll hold. There's a creek about 3 miles west, good water, shade. You and the children can rest there while I work. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. I don't have anything to give you. Didn't ask for anything. Mara's throat tightened. Why are you doing this? Silas looked at her, then at the children watching from the wagon with wide, frightened eyes. Because someone should have done it for my family, he said quietly, and no one did. Before Mara could respond, he'd already turned back to his horse, pulling tools from his saddlebag. He worked in silence, quick and efficient, reinforcing the axle with strips of leather and a piece of iron he'd had tucked away. Jonah stepped forward hesitantly. Mister, can I help? Silas glanced up, studied the boy for a moment, then nodded. Hold this steady. Jonah's face lit up. He grabbed the axle, bracing it while Silas secured the bindings. Mara watched, her mind spinning. She didn't trust this, couldn't afford to. But Samuel was drinking from the canteen now, and the other children were watching Silas with something she hadn't seen in their eyes for weeks. Hope. It took less than an hour. When Silas stood wiping his hands on his coat, the axle was solid. Not perfect, but functional. That'll get you to the creek, he said. After that, we'll see. You're coming with us? Mara asked, startled. Silas looked at her, his expression unreadable. You think I'd fix your wagon and just leave you out here? I don't know what to think. Then don't. Just come with me. He climbed back onto his horse, took the rope harness from Mara's shoulders before she could protest, and tied it to his saddle. The wagon lurched forward, rolling smooth and steady for the first time in days. Mara stood there, stunned, as Silas looked back at her. You coming? He asked. She looked at her children, at Jonah standing a little straighter, at Eliza holding Samuel, who was alive, at the twins, at Thomas, at little Abigail, all of them watching her, waiting. Mara took a breath, and then she followed. The creek was everything Silas had promised. Clear water running over smooth stones, cottonwood trees providing blessed shade. Soft grass where the children could sit without fear of scorpions or snakes. The moment they arrived, the children scrambled out of the wagon and ran for the water, splashing and laughing. Actual laughter, a sound Mara had almost forgotten. Silas dismounted, filled every container they had, then started a small fire. From his saddlebag, he produced salt pork, cornmeal, and a tin of peaches. Mara stared. You just carry all that? I travel a lot. Where are you coming from? Montana. Where are you going? South. That's not an answer. Silas looked at her, the faintest hint of something that might have been a smile. It's the only one I've got. He cooked in silence, Johnny cakes in the pan, pork sizzling over the fire, peaches divided carefully into 7 small portions. The children ate like wolves, tears streaming down their faces, because it was the first real food they'd had in days. Mara couldn't eat. Her stomach was too knotted. Instead, she sat by the fire, watching Silas move with calm, methodical efficiency, cleaning the pan, checking the horses, refilling the canteen. "You're not from Wyoming," she said finally. "No." "Where then?" "Texas. Originally. Long way from home. Don't have a home anymore." The words were flat, final. Mara recognized that tone. It was the same one she'd used when people asked about Daniel. "Don't ask, it still bleeds." Night fell. Silas spread blankets for the children, built up the fire, and then sat on the far side of the flames, his back against a tree, his hat pulled low. Mara waited until the children were asleep, then moved closer. "Silas." He looked up. "Thank you." Her voice cracked. I don't know how to." "You don't need to." "I do. You saved us. You saved my son." Silas's gaze moved to Samuel, sleeping peacefully in Eliza's arms. "He's strong. He would have made it." "No, he wouldn't have." Silence. "Why are you really doing this?" Mara asked quietly. "Don't tell me it's just because you're a good man. Nobody's that good." Silas stared into the fire. For a long time he didn't answer. Then, "I had a wife once, and a daughter. They died 8 years ago. Cholera epidemic swept through our town. I was away, working a cattle drive. By the time I got back..." He stopped, swallowed. There was nothing left to come back to. Mara's chest tightened. "Every time I see a woman alone with kids," Silas continued, "I think about her. About what it must have been like, dying alone, scared, with no one to help." He looked up at Mara, his eyes dark and haunted. "I couldn't save them, but maybe I can save you." Mara's eyes burned. "You don't owe me anything." "I know." "Then why?" "Because maybe it'll mean something." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe if I save enough people, it'll make up for the ones I couldn't." Mara understood. She understood grief, the kind that carved you hollow, the kind that made you want to do impossible things just to fill the emptiness. She reached across the fire and placed her hand on his. "It already means something," she said softly. Silas looked down at her hand, scarred and blistered and strong. And for the first time since he'd found her on that road, he didn't look away. Morning came too soon. Mara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She sat up, disoriented, and found Silas crouched by the fire, cooking breakfast. "How long have you been awake?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Couple hours." "You should have woken me." "You needed rest." The children woke one by one, drawn by the smell of food. Silas served them without a word. Bacon, Johnny cakes, coffee for Mara and Jonah, milk for the younger ones. Where had he even gotten milk? After they'd eaten, Silas inspected the wagon again, reinforced a few weak spots, then looked at Mara. "You still heading to Fort Bridger?" Yes, I think so. The missionaries there. They closed down last year." Mara's heart sank. "What?" "Funding dried up. They moved operations to Cheyenne." "But I thought..." She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't admit that her entire plan had just evaporated. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've got a place, about 15 miles west of here. It's not much, just a cabin, but it's got a roof, 4 walls, and a creek nearby. You and the kids could stay there until you figure things out." Mara stared at him. "You're offering me your home?" "I'm not using it." "Why not?" "I told you, I travel." "Silas, I can't just..." "You got a better option?" She didn't. God help her, she didn't. "How do I know this isn't a trap?" she asked, hating how desperate she sounded. "How do I know you're not going to..." "You don't." Silas's gaze was steady. "You're going to have to trust me." Mara looked at her children, at Jonah, watching Silas with something like hero worship, at Eliza holding Samuel, who was finally smiling again, at the twins, at Thomas, at Abigail, all of them healthier, safer, alive because of this stranger. "Okay," she whispered. Silas nodded once. "We'll leave in an hour." The cabin was small, weathered, and tucked into a valley so remote Mara couldn't believe it was real. But it was. One large room with a fireplace, a loft above for sleeping, shelves stocked with dry goods, beans, flour, coffee, sugar, a well outside with sweet cold water. The children ran inside, marveling at the space, the warmth, the safety. Mara stood in the doorway, unable to move. Silas set her bags down, then turned to leave. "Wait," Mara said. "Where are you going?" "I've got business in town." "Will you come back?" Silas looked at her, hesitated. "Yeah," he said finally. I'll come back." "Promise?" "I promise." He tipped his hat and rode away. Mara watched until he disappeared over the ridge. Then she turned to her children, gathered them close, and let herself cry. Ugly, wrenching sobs that she'd been holding back for 10 days. Because for the first time since Daniel died, they were safe. And she'd started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd survive. Silas returned 3 days later with supplies: blankets, salt, flour, lamp oil. He also brought boots, real leather boots, sized for a woman. Mara cried when she put them on. Over the next weeks, a pattern emerged. Silas would stay for a few days, chopping wood, fixing things, teaching Jonah how to hunt and trap. Then he'd leave, returning a week later with more supplies. He never stayed in the cabin, always slept outside even when storms rolled through. The children adored him. Jonah followed him everywhere. The twins made him wildflower crowns. Even little Abigail, shy and silent since Daniel's death, started calling him Mr. Silas and sitting in his lap by the fire. Mara watched it all, her heart twisting, because she was falling in love with him, and she had no idea if he felt the same. One night, after the children were asleep, she brought him coffee where he sat by the fire. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said softly. "Doing what?" "Taking care of us." "I know." "Then why do you?" Silas stared into the flames. "Because I'm tired of being alone." Mara's breath caught. "I lost everything," Silas continued. "And I thought maybe I was supposed to stay lost. But then I found you, and I realized maybe I wasn't lost. Maybe I was just waiting." "For what?" Mara whispered. Silas looked up at her, his eyes dark and serious. "For something worth staying for." Mara's hand shook as she set down her cup. "Silas, I'm broken. I've got 7 children and nothing else. I can't offer you." "I don't need anything." He stood, stepped closer. "I just need to know if you'll let me stay." Mara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she breathed. "God, yes." Silas cupped her face in his hands, rough, scarred hands that had held her together when she was falling apart. And then he kissed her. It was gentle, reverent, like a promise. When they pulled apart, Mara was shaking. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to start over." "Neither do I." Silas rested his forehead against hers. "But maybe we figure it out together." Mara closed her eyes, let herself lean into him, let herself believe. "Maybe we will." For the first time in a long, brutal year, Mara Ellington let herself hope. And when morning came, Silas didn't leave. He stayed. The morning Silas stayed was the morning everything changed. Mara woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood. Steady, rhythmic, reassuring. She sat up in the loft where she'd made her bed among the children, careful not to wake Abigail curled against her side, and looked down through the gap in the floorboards. Silas was outside, already working. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, painting the valley in shades of pearl and gold, and he was building something. A chicken coop, she realized. Where he'd gotten the lumber, she had no idea. But there it was, taking shape under his hands like he'd conjured it from morning mist and determination. She climbed down the ladder quietly, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The air was cold and clean, sharp in her lungs. Silas looked up when he heard her footsteps, his breath misting in the early chill. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." Mara hugged the shawl tighter. "What are you building?" "Coop. Figured you could use chickens. Eggs for the kids." "Silas, you don't have to." "I know." He set down the hammer, straightened. "But I want to." There was something different about him this morning, something settled, like a man who'd finally stopped running and decided to stand his ground. Mara felt her throat tighten. You meant it, what you said last night. Every word. You're really staying. If you'll have me. Mara crossed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. He smelled like pine smoke and leather and safety. His arms came around her strong and sure, and for a moment they just stood there in the breaking dawn, two broken people learning how to be whole. The children will wake up soon, she whispered against his shirt. I know. They'll see you here. They'll ask questions. Let them. Mara pulled back, looked up at him. What do I tell them? Silas brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch impossibly gentle. The truth. That I'm staying, that I'm going to help take care of them, that they're safe. And us? What are we? Silas was quiet for a moment. Then, whatever you want us to be. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Mara. I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving Daniel, but I'm asking if I can be here. If I can be part of this family you're fighting so hard to keep together. Tears burned in Mara's eyes. Yes, God, yes. Behind them, the cabin door creaked open. They turned to find Jonah standing in the doorway, barefoot and tousled, staring at them with wide eyes. Mr. Silas? The boy said, his voice uncertain. You're still here, Silas nodded slowly. I am. You're not leaving? Not unless your mother wants me to. Jonah looked at Mara, then back at Silas. Then a smile broke across his face, huge and bright and relieved. You're staying? Really staying? Really staying. The boy let out a whoop that would have woken the dead and launched himself off the porch, crashing into Silas with enough force to make the man stagger. Silas caught him, steadied him, and then Jonah was talking a mile a minute. Can you teach me to shoot? Pa said he would, but he never got the chance, and I need to learn because I'm the man of the house now and I need to protect everyone, and… Jonah, breathe, Mara said, laughing through her tears. But Silas was smiling, an actual smile, rare and real. Yeah, son, I can teach you. The word hung in the air. Son. Not quite true, not yet, but close enough to matter. Jonah's eyes went bright. Really? Really. But first you're going to help me finish this coop. Deal? Deal! By the time the sun was fully up, all 7 children were awake and buzzing around Silas like bees around honey. Eliza wanted to know if he could teach her to fish. The twins begged for stories about Texas. Thomas showed him a rock he'd found that looked like a horse. And Abigail, shy little Abigail, took his hand and wouldn't let go. Mara watched it all from the porch, her heart so full it hurt. This was what she'd wanted, what she'd prayed for in those dark days after Daniel died, when the world felt like it was collapsing inward. Not riches, not salvation from some distant relative, just this. Someone strong enough to stand beside her, someone willing to love her children as fiercely as she did. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found him. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt like grace. Silas worked from dawn to dusk, fixing everything that was broken, building everything they needed. He reinforced the cabin's roof, replaced the cracked window glass with oilcloth until he could get real panes from town, dug a root cellar to store food through the winter. He taught Jonah to set snares and check trap lines, showed Eliza how to gut a fish without flinching, and let the younger children follow him around like ducklings. Mara cooked, cleaned, mended, and tried not to cry every time she watched Silas lift Abigail onto his shoulders or ruffle Thomas's hair. He was so gentle with them, so patient, nothing like the hard, silent man she'd first seen on that ridge. At night, after the children were asleep, they would sit by the fire and talk about everything, about nothing, about the lives they'd lost and the one they were trying to build. I was a teacher, Mara told him one night, her voice soft in the firelight. Before I married Daniel, I had a little schoolhouse in Ohio, 23 students. I loved it. Why'd you stop? Because I fell in love. She smiled sadly. Daniel was a lumber foreman, strong, handsome, full of plans. He promised me adventure, a new life out west, and I believed him. We moved to Wyoming when I was pregnant with Jonah. Daniel said he'd build us a house, start his own logging company, make us rich. But he didn't. No, He tried. God, he tried so hard. But everything he touched seemed to fall apart. Business deals that went south, investments that failed. And the children kept coming, and the money kept running out. And she stopped, swallowed hard. I loved him. Even when he was drowning us in debt I didn't know about, I loved him. But I was so angry, Silas. So angry that he left me with nothing, that he died and left me to clean up his mess. Silas reached across the space between them and took her hand. You're allowed to be angry. I shouldn't be. He's dead. I should just... You're allowed, Silas repeated firmly. Love doesn't mean you can't be angry when someone hurts you, even if they didn't mean to. Mara's eyes filled. Were you angry when your wife died? Silas stared into the fire. Furious. At God. At the world. At myself for not being there. I carried that rage for years, drank myself half to death trying to drown it. Picked fights with men twice my size, hoping one of them would finish what I couldn't. He looked at her. And then one day I woke up in a ditch outside Billings, Montana, covered in my own blood, and I realized I had a choice. I could die angry, or I could live anyway. What made you choose life? Nothing noble. I just got tired of hurting. He squeezed her hand. But I'm glad I did, because it led me here. Mara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. I'm glad too. They sat like that until the fire burned low, not saying anything, not needing to, just being. It was enough. But peace, Mara was learning, was a fragile thing. 2 weeks after Silas stayed, Mara made the mistake of going into town. She needed supplies, flour, sugar, thread, and Silas had offered to take her. They left the children with Jonah in charge, hitched the wagon, and rode the 15 miles to Sweetwater Station, the closest thing to a town in that part of Wyoming. It wasn't much. A general store, a saloon, a church, and maybe 20 houses scattered along a single muddy road. But it was civilization, and Mara felt her shoulders relax as they pulled up to the store. I'll get the flour, Silas said, climbing down. You get what you need for the kids. Mara nodded, took his offered hand, and stepped into the store. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Henley, was a stout woman with shrewd eyes and a mouth that loved gossip. She looked up when Mara entered, and her expression shifted. Surprise, then calculation, then something that looked almost like pity. Mrs. Ellington, she said slowly, I'd heard you'd left the county. I'm still here, Mara said, forcing a smile. Just needed some thread and sugar. Mrs. Henley's gaze flicked to the door where Silas was loading flour sacks into the wagon. That's Silas Hawthorne with you, isn't it? Yes. He's been helping us. Helping? Mrs. Henley's tone made the word sound obscene. That what we're calling it? Mara's spine stiffened. I don't know what you're implying, Mrs. Henley, but, oh, I'm not implying anything, dear, just observing. You've been seen with him quite a bit, and you, a widow with 7 children. People talk, you understand. Mara's face burned. Mr. Hawthorne has been nothing but respectful. He's given us shelter and... Shelter, Mrs. Henley clicked her tongue. In his cabin, alone, with 7 children and no chaperone. Mrs. Ellington, I'm trying to help you. You need to understand how this looks. How it looks? Mara's voice rose. It looks like a man helping a desperate woman and her children survive. That's all. Is it? Mrs. Henley leaned across the counter, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Because I heard Thomas Avery's been asking questions. About you. About where you went. And if he hears you're living unmarried with a man... Mara's blood went cold. Thomas has no claim on my children. He's family, and he's got money. If he takes this to a judge, claims you're unfit... Mrs. Henley trailed off meaningfully. Mara's hands shook as she set coins on the counter. I'm not unfit. I'm surviving. I believe you, dear, but will a judge? Mrs. Henley wrapped the thread and sugar in brown paper. Just think about it, for the children's sake. Mara grabbed the package and left without another word. Silas was waiting by the wagon, and he took one look at her face and frowned. What happened? Nothing. Let's go. Mara, please. Just take me home. They rode in tense silence until they were halfway back to the cabin. Then Silas pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to her. What did she say to you? Mara stared at her hands. That people are talking. About us. About me living in your cabin without being married. That it looks improper. Silas's jaw tightened. I've been sleeping outside. They don't know that. And even if they did, she took a shaky breath. Thomas Avery's asking questions about where I went. If he finds out I'm living with you, unmarried, he could use it against me. He could take the children. He won't. You don't know that. Mara, he has money, Silas. He has lawyers, and I have nothing. Nothing but you. Her voice cracked. And if being with you means losing my children, then I can't. I can't. Silas reached for her, pulled her against him. Listen to me. No one is taking those kids. You hear me? No one. But what if... Marry me. Mara froze. What? Silas pulled back, cupped her face in his hands. Marry me. Today. Tomorrow. Whenever you're ready. We'll make it legal. Make it right in the eyes of the law. Then no one can say a damn thing. Silas, we've only known each other a few weeks. I don't care. His voice was fierce. I don't care if it's been a week or a year. I know what I want. I want you. I want those kids. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're safe and they're safe, and I'm the one standing between you and the world. So marry me. Tears streamed down Mara's face. You're serious. Dead serious. But what if you change your mind? What if... I won't. How do you know? Because I've already lost one family. Silas's voice was raw. And I'll be damned if I lose another. Mara stared at him, this impossible man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to say. She thought about Mrs. Henley's warning, about Thomas Avery circling like a vulture, about the 7 children sleeping peacefully in a cabin because Silas had given them shelter, and she thought about what Daniel would have wanted. Not for her to die with him, but to live, to fight, to grab happiness with both hands and refuse to let go. Yes, she whispered. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Silas let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob and kissed her, hard and desperate and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Mara was laughing through her tears. How are we going to do this? We don't even have a preacher. Judge Thompson in Rock Springs. He owes me a favor. We can ride there tomorrow, take the kids, make it official. Just like that? Just like that. Silas brushed his thumb across her cheek. Unless you want something fancier. Mara thought about the wedding she'd had with Daniel. White dress, flowers, church full of people. It had been beautiful. It had also been a lie. A fairy tale that crumbled under the weight of real life. This was different. This was choosing each other with eyes wide open, scars visible. No illusions about what love required. No, she said softly. This is exactly what I want. They told the children that night. Jonah whooped and tackled Silas again. Eliza cried and hugged Mara so tight she could barely breathe. The twins danced in circles singing Pa Silas, until they collapsed in giggles. Thomas and Abigail didn't fully understand, but they clapped because everyone else was happy. And when the excitement died down and the children were tucked into bed, Mara stood in the doorway watching Silas build up the fire for the night. Silas? He looked up. Thank you for choosing us. Silas crossed to her, took both her hands. Thank you for letting me. They married 3 days later in Rock Springs. Judge Thompson, a gruff man with kind eyes, performed the ceremony in his parlor with all 7 children as witnesses. Mara wore her best dress, a simple gray cotton she'd mended carefully. Silas wore his cleanest shirt and combed his hair back. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, just 2 people making promises they intended to keep. Do you, Silas Hawthorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Mara Ellington, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Mara looked at Silas, at this man who'd found her at her lowest, who'd lifted her up without asking for anything in return, who'd chosen her broken, complicated, beautiful family. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Silas leaned down and kissed her softly. The children cheered. Judge Thompson smiled and shook Silas's hand, and Mara Hawthorne, no longer Ellington, felt something she thought she'd lost forever: joy. They celebrated with penny candy for the children and a real hotel dinner: roast chicken, potatoes, apple pie. The kids ate until they were stuffed, faces sticky with pie filling, laughing so hard Thomas snorted milk through his nose. That night, in a real bed with clean sheets, Silas held Mara close and whispered against her hair, "You're stuck with me now, Mrs. Hawthorne." Mara smiled in the darkness. "Good. I was worried you'd change your mind." "Never." "Promise?" "Promise." But even as she drifted off to sleep, safe in her husband's arms, a small voice in the back of Mara's mind whispered what Mrs. Henley had said. Thomas Avery's asking questions. She pushed the thought away. Tomorrow's worries could wait. Tonight, she was married. Her children were safe. And for the first time in a long time, she dared to believe the worst was behind them. She was wrong. They returned to the cabin the next morning to find someone waiting. A man on horseback, expensive suit, cold eyes. He had the look of someone used to getting what he wanted, money and power written into every line of his face. Beside him stood the county sheriff, looking deeply uncomfortable. Mara's blood turned to ice. She knew that face. She'd seen it at Daniel's funeral, watching her with calculation. Thomas Avery. Silas stopped the wagon 30 feet away and climbed down slowly, positioning himself between the children and the visitors. His hand rested casually near his belt, where Mara knew he kept his revolver. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Silas's voice was calm, polite, dangerous. Thomas dismounted, smoothed his suit. "You must be Silas Hawthorne. I'm Thomas Avery. This is Sheriff Cutler. We're here to see Mrs. Ellington." "That would be Mrs. Hawthorne now," Mara said, climbing down from the wagon with her head high. "We married yesterday." Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. How convenient, and so quick. One might almost call it suspicious. "One might call it none of your business," Silas said quietly. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Hawthorne, Mr. Avery here has filed a formal petition with the court regarding the welfare of Daniel Ellington's children. I'm just here to verify facts." "What facts?" Mara demanded, her voice shaking. Thomas pulled papers from his coat. "Facts like whether it's appropriate for a grieving widow to remarry mere weeks after her husband's death. Facts like whether 7 children should be living in a one-room cabin in the middle of nowhere with a man who's little more than a stranger. Facts like whether you, Mara, are truly fit to raise these children in such circumstances." Rage flooded through Mara. "How dare you!" Silas's hand on her arm stopped her. His voice stayed level. "Sheriff, those children are clothed, fed, healthy, and safe. Their mother is my wife. This is our home. Everything here is legal and proper." Sheriff Cutler nodded slowly. "That's what it looks like to me, Mr. Hawthorne." Thomas's face darkened. "Sheriff, need I remind you that I'm the children's closest living relative? That I have every right to ensure their welfare?" "You signed away that right when Daniel died," Mara snapped. "You wanted nothing to do with us until you thought you could control us." "I wanted to help you, Mara. You refused. And now look, living in squalor with a man you barely know." "This isn't squalor," Jonah's voice cut through the tension. The boy had climbed down from the wagon and stood beside Silas, chin raised defiantly. "This is our home. Mr. Silas, Pa Silas, he built us a chicken coop. He fixed the roof. He teaches me stuff. He's good to us." Thomas looked at the boy with something like disgust. "Child, you don't understand." "I understand plenty," Jonah said. "I understand you didn't care about us when we were starving, and now that we're safe, you want to take us away. That's not helping. That's just being mean." Out of the mouths of babes, Sheriff Cutler cleared his throat. "Mr. Avery, I don't see grounds for intervention here. The children appear well cared for. The marriage is legal. Unless you have evidence of abuse or neglect." "Give me time, Sheriff. I'll find it." Thomas mounted his horse, looking down at Mara with cold promise. "This isn't over, Mara. Those children should be with family, real family, not some drifter you spread your legs for." Silas moved. One moment he was standing still. The next, he had Thomas by the collar, yanking him half out of the saddle, a gun pressed cold against the man's temple. "Say that again," Silas whispered, his voice like winter. "I dare you." Thomas went pale. The sheriff's hand went to his own gun. "Mr. Hawthorne, let him go. He insulted my wife. And if you kill him, you'll hang. Is that what you want? To leave her a widow twice over?" Silas's hand shook. For a terrible moment, Mara thought he might pull the trigger anyway. Then Jonah's small hand grabbed Silas's coat. "Pa, don't, please." Silas closed his eyes, took a breath, and slowly, deliberately, he released Thomas and stepped back. Thomas scrambled to right himself, face flushed with humiliation and rage. "You'll regret that, Hawthorne." "I already do," Silas said coldly. "I regret not pulling the trigger." The sheriff moved his horse between them. "Mr. Avery, I suggest you leave. Now." Thomas straightened his collar, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't finished." "Yeah, it is," Sheriff Cutler said firmly. "You got no case, Avery. Go home." Thomas stared at Mara one last time. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I ever made," Mara said quietly, "was believing you had a heart." Thomas rode away, the sheriff following with an apologetic nod. The moment they disappeared over the ridge, Mara's legs gave out. Silas caught her, held her while she shook. "He's not going to stop," she whispered. "He's going to keep coming until—" "Then let him come." Silas's voice was steel. "I meant what I said, Mara. No one's taking these kids. Not him, not anyone, over my dead body." "That's what I'm afraid of," Mara said, tears streaming down her face. Behind them, 7 children watched with wide, frightened eyes. And Mara realized that marrying Silas hadn't solved their problems. It had only made them more visible. The fight was just beginning. That night, Silas didn't sleep. Mara found him just before dawn, sitting on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the ridge where Thomas Avery had disappeared. The valley was still dark, the sky just beginning to lighten at the edges, and his breath made small clouds in the cold air. "You've been out here all night," she said softly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she sat beside him. "Someone needs to keep watch." "Silas, he's not coming back tonight. The sheriff made it clear. He has no legal grounds. That doesn't mean he won't try something else." Silas's voice was flat, exhausted. "Men like Thomas Avery don't give up when they lose. They just get meaner." Mara pulled the blanket tighter. "What do you think he'll do?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, we need to be ready." He finally looked at her, and she could see the weight in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mara. I thought marrying you would protect you. Instead, I just painted a bigger target on your back." "You didn't do anything wrong." "I put a gun to a man's head in front of a sheriff. That was wrong." "He called me a—" Mara couldn't even finish the sentence. The words still burned. "I know what he called you." Silas's jaw tightened. "And I should have killed him for it." "No." Mara grabbed his hand. "No, you shouldn't have. Because then where would we be? You'd be dead or in prison, and I'd be right back where I started. Alone." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I lost control. I never lose control. You were protecting me. I was protecting my pride." He set the rifle aside, scrubbed his hands over his face. "That's how men like me get killed, Mara. We let our pride make decisions our heads should make." "Then what do we do?" Mara asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "How do we fight someone with money and lawyers and the law on his side?" "We make sure the law stays on our side." Silas stood, helped her to her feet. "Today I'm riding into Rock Springs, going to talk to Judge Thompson, file papers making me legal guardian of your children in case anything happens to you. And I'm going to ask around, see if Thomas Avery has any skeletons we can use." "What kind of skeletons?" "The kind that makes a judge think twice about giving him custody of anyone." Silas's smile was grim. "Every rich man has something he doesn't want people knowing. I just need to find it." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it was too dangerous, that poking around in Thomas Avery's business would only make things worse. But she looked at the cabin behind them, at the windows where her children slept safe and warm, and she knew they were out of options. "Be careful," she whispered. Silas kissed her forehead. "Always am." He left an hour later, riding hard for Rock Springs with a promise to be back before dark. Mara watched until he disappeared, then turned to face the day ahead. The children were subdued at breakfast. Even the twins were quiet, pushing their porridge around their bowls without eating. "Is Pa Silas coming back?" Abigail asked in her small voice. "Of course he is, sweetheart," Mara said, forcing brightness into her tone. "He just has business in town." "Is the mean man going to take us away?" Thomas's eyes were huge, terrified. Mara knelt down, gathered him close. "No, baby, no one is taking you anywhere, I promise." But Jonah caught her eye from across the table, and she could see he didn't believe her. He was old enough to understand that some promises couldn't be kept, that sometimes the world took what it wanted, no matter how hard you fought. Later, while the younger children played outside under Eliza's watchful eye, Jonah helped Mara wash dishes in silence. Finally, he spoke. "Ma, what happens if that man comes back when Pa Silas isn't here?" Mara's hand stilled in the wash water. "He won't." "But what if he does?" She looked at her son, 12 years old and already carrying the weight of a grown man on his shoulders. Daniel's eyes. Her determination. "Then you take your brothers and sisters and you run. You go to the creek, follow it east to the Miller farm like Pa Silas showed you. You tell them what happened and you let them help. You understand?" Jonah's jaw set. "I'm not leaving you. Jonah, I'm not." His voice cracked. "I couldn't protect Pa when that tree fell. I'm not going to run away and leave you too." Mara's heart shattered. She pulled him into her arms, this boy trying so hard to be a man. "Oh, sweetheart, what happened to your father wasn't your fault. You couldn't have stopped it. I should have been there. I should have—" "No." She held him tighter. "Listen to me. Your job isn't to protect me. Your job is to protect your brothers and sisters. That's what your father would want. That's what I need from you." Jonah was crying now, silent tears soaking into her dress. "I'm scared, Ma." "I know. I'm scared too." She pulled back, cupped his face. "But we're not alone anymore. We have Pa Silas, and we have each other. And that means we're going to be okay." She prayed she wasn't lying. The day dragged on, tense and endless. Mara kept the children close, worked on mending to keep her hands busy, and watched the ridge obsessively. Every shadow made her heart jump. Every bird call made her reach for the rifle Silas had left propped by the door. By late afternoon, her nerves were screaming. She was just putting bread in the oven when Eliza called from outside, her voice sharp with alarm. "Ma, someone's coming!" Mara's blood turned to ice. She ran to the door, rifle in hand, and her heart sank. Not Silas. A carriage, black and expensive, drawn by matched horses, and beside it, 6 men on horseback. Hard-looking men. The kind you hired when you wanted someone hurt. Thomas Avery sat in the carriage, smiling. "Children, inside," Mara said, her voice deadly calm. "Right now." They scattered, Jonah herding the little ones through the door. Mara stepped onto the porch, rifle leveled at the approaching carriage. Thomas raised his hands in mock surrender as the carriage stopped. "Now, Mara, is that any way to greet family?" "You're not family. Get off my land." "Actually, this land belongs to Silas Hawthorne, not you, which means you're trespassing." Thomas's smile widened. "I checked. Your husband never filed a deed transfer. This property is still in his name, which means legally you have no right to be here." Mara's hands tightened on the rifle. "Silas gave me permission to be here." "Did he? Where is he, by the way? Off drinking somewhere? Gambling? Whoring?" Thomas shook his head sadly. Poor Mara. Always picking such unreliable men. "What do you want, Thomas?" "I told you, I want to help." He gestured to the men beside him. "These gentlemen are here to escort you and the children to proper lodgings while we sort out this unfortunate situation. There's a charitable home in Cheyenne that takes in destitute families. We're not destitute. You're living in a one-room cabin with a man who abandoned you the moment I showed up. I'd call that destitute." Thomas stepped down from the carriage, his boots crunching on the frost-hard ground. "Be reasonable, Mara. You can't win this fight. I have lawyers, money, connections. What do you have? A marriage certificate that's barely dry and a cabin that isn't even yours." "I have a gun," Mara said quietly, "and I will use it." Thomas laughed. Oh, I don't think you will, because if you shoot me, these men will shoot you. And then what happens to your precious children? They end up in an orphanage anyway, or worse. Behind Mara, the door creaked. She didn't turn around, but she felt Jonah slip out onto the porch, felt him press something into her free hand. Daniel's old revolver. Ma's not alone, Jonah said, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. And if you try to take us, you'll have to go through both of us. Thomas's expression darkened. Boy, don't be stupid. The lady said get off her land. The new voice came from the ridge. Everyone turned. A man stood there, backlit by the afternoon sun, a rifle in his hands. He started down the slope, and Mara's heart leapt. Not Silas. Someone else. But as he got closer, more figures appeared on the ridge. 10, 20, 30. Men and women both, all armed, all moving down toward the cabin in a slow, implacable line. Thomas's hired men shifted nervously, hands moving toward their guns. I wouldn't, the first man said as he reached the yard. He was older, weathered, with kind eyes and a sheriff's star pinned to his chest. Not Sheriff Cutler. Someone new. Name's John Miller. I own the farm 5 miles east. These folks here? They're my neighbors. Word travels fast in these parts when someone threatens a family. This is none of your business, Thomas snapped. Wrong. A woman stepped forward, gray-haired and formidable. Mara Hawthorne is our neighbor. That makes it our business. More voices joined in. Silas helped me birth my calf last spring, saved my whole herd. He fixed my well when I couldn't afford to pay anyone. He sat with my wife when she was dying, wouldn't leave until she passed peaceful. That man's got more honor in his little finger than you've got in your whole body, Avery. Thomas's face went red. This is absurd. I'm trying to protect these children from an unsuitable environment. Only thing unsuitable here is you, John Miller said flatly. Now, I did some asking around after you left this morning. Turns out you've been sniffing around your brother's estate, trying to get your hands on a property deed he had filed in Montana. Mining rights, if I remember right. Worth a fair bit. Thomas went very still. Seems to me, Miller continued, you're not interested in these kids at all. You just want leverage to make Mara give you what you're after. That about right? I have no idea what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Miller spat in the dirt. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in that fancy carriage. You're going to ride out of this valley, and you're not going to bother this family again. Because if you do, every person here is going to testify in court about your real intentions. And I don't think a judge will look kindly on a man who threatens children to steal their inheritance. Thomas's jaw worked. His hired men were outnumbered 3-1, and they knew it. His hand trembled with rage as he pointed at Mara. This isn't over. Yes, Mara said, her voice ringing clear across the yard. It is. For a long moment, Thomas just stared at her. Then he climbed back into his carriage and gestured sharply to his men. Drive. They left in a cloud of dust and fury. Mara's legs gave out the moment they disappeared over the ridge. She sat down hard on the porch steps, the rifle clattering beside her. Jonah wrapped his arms around her, and she held him tight, shaking so badly her teeth chattered. John Miller approached slowly, hat in his hands. Mrs. Hawthorne, you all right? Mara looked up at him, at all these people who'd come to stand between her children and danger, and burst into tears. Thank you, she sobbed. Thank you. I don't know how to... No thanks needed. Miller knelt down, his voice gentle. Silas rode through my place this morning, told me what happened, asked if I'd keep an eye out. I put the word out to the other farms and, well, he gestured at the assembled crowd. Folks came running. But why? You don't even know me. We know Silas, and we know good people when we see them. The gray-haired woman stepped forward, pressed a basket into Mara's hands. I'm Martha Cooper. This here's got bread and stew and some preserves. You feed those babies here, and if that bastard comes back, you send word. We'll come running again. One by one, the neighbors introduced themselves, pressed food and blankets and promises into Mara's hands, told her stories about Silas, how he'd helped birth calves, fix roofs, sit vigil with the dying, how he'd shown up 2 years ago, quiet and alone, and slowly become the man everyone called when they needed help. He never talks about himself, John Miller said, but he saved half the people in this valley one way or another. We owe him, and now we owe you. By the time they left, the cabin was full of supplies, and Mara's heart was full of something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Silas returned just after sunset, riding hard, and pulled up short when he saw the crowd of people still lingering in the yard. "What happened?" he demanded, swinging down from his horse. "Is everyone all right?" "We're fine," Mara said, stepping off the porch. "Thanks to your friends." "What?" John Miller clapped Silas on the shoulder. "Avery came back, brought hired guns. We sent him packing." Silas's face went white. "He came here? When I wasn't—" "We handled it," Mara said firmly, "because you'd already handled it. You asked for help, and help came." Silas looked around at the assembled neighbors, something like wonder in his eyes. "You all came?" "Course we did," Martha Cooper said. "Your family, Silas, all of you." Silas's throat worked. He opened his mouth, closed it, couldn't seem to find words. So he just nodded. The neighbors left one by one as full dark fell, but not before extracting promises that Mara would bring the children to the church social next month, that Silas would help with the autumn harvest, that they'd all look out for each other. When the last wagon disappeared, Silas finally turned to Mara. "I shouldn't have left you. You had to. I should have been here." "You were." Mara took his hand. "You asked for help. You built something here, Silas, a community, people who care about you, about us. You gave me that." Silas pulled her against him, buried his face in her hair. She felt him shaking. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. "When I came over that ridge and saw the crowd, I thought, I know, but you didn't. We're here. We're safe. Because of them. Because of you." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the darkness, while inside the cabin the children settled in for the night, their voices rising in laughter because for once, just once, the monsters had been driven back. Later, after the children were asleep and a cold supper had been eaten and Silas had checked every window latch twice, Mara sat beside him at the table and asked what he'd found in Rock Springs. Silas pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Judge Thompson filed the guardianship papers. They're official as of today. If anything happens to you, the kids stay with me. Avery can't touch them. And the other thing, the skeletons?" Silas's smile was grim. "Daniel had a deed, mining rights to a silver claim in Montana, filed it 3 months before he died. It's worthless. The mine played out years ago, but Thomas doesn't know that. He thinks it's still producing. He's been trying to get his hands on it since Daniel passed." So Miller was right. This was never about the children. Not for a second. Silas handed her another paper. "This is the deed. It's legally yours now. I had Thompson transfer it to your name." Mara stared at the document. "You're giving me this?" "It was always yours, Mara. Daniel left it to you, not Thomas. You." "But if it's worthless, Thomas doesn't know that. And as long as he thinks you have something he wants, he's predictable. He'll try to negotiate, make deals. He won't risk a fight he might lose." "What if he finds out it's worthless?" "Then we deal with it then." Silas covered her hand with his. "But I don't think he will. Men like Thomas see what they want to see, and right now he sees a fortune he can't reach." Mara folded the deed carefully, tucked it into her dress pocket. "You think he'll really leave us alone?" "I think what happened today scared him. He didn't expect resistance, didn't expect people to stand up for us." Silas's expression softened. "I didn't either, if I'm honest." "Why not? You helped all of them." "Helping people doesn't mean they'll help you back. I learned that a long time ago." "Well," Mara said, squeezing his hand, "I guess you learned wrong." Silas looked at her, and for the first time since Thomas Avery had darkened their door, he smiled. A real smile. Small, but genuine. "Yeah, I guess I did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling, the cabin warm and safe around them. Outside, the valley stretched dark and peaceful under a sky full of stars. Finally, Silas stood, helped Mara to her feet. "Come on, you need rest." "So do you." "I'll rest when I'm dead." But he let her lead him to the bed they'd set up in the corner, screened off with a curtain for privacy. They lay down together, fully clothed, too tired for anything but holding each other. Silas? Mara whispered in the darkness. Yeah? When you asked for help today. When you rode to Miller's farm and told him what was happening. That was the hardest thing you've ever done, wasn't it? Silas was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, yes. Why? Because asking for help means admitting you can't do it alone. And I've been alone so long, I forgot how to be anything else. Mara rolled over, found his face in the darkness, traced the line of his jaw with her fingers. You're not alone anymore. I know. His hand came up, covered hers. Scares the hell out of me. Why? Because now I have something to lose again? Mara's throat tightened. I'm not going anywhere. You don't know that. Life doesn't make promises. No, but I do. She pressed her forehead to his. I promise, Silas Hawthorne, I'm not leaving you. Not willingly, not ever. Silas's breath hitched. Mara. Say it back. Say it. I'm not leaving you. His voice broke. Not ever. They kissed then, slow and sweet, and full of all the things they couldn't say out loud. All the fear and hope and desperate, fragile love they'd built in the space between survival and living. When they finally pulled apart, Silas held her close and Mara listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. But inside, the cabin was warm. The children slept peacefully, and for the first time since Thomas Avery had appeared on their ridge, Mara let herself believe they might actually survive this. She was almost right. The attack came 3 days later. Mara woke to the smell of smoke. For a moment, still trapped in the fog of sleep, she thought someone had left the stove door open. Then Silas was shaking her, pulling her upright, his voice urgent in the darkness. Fire! The coop's on fire! Get the kids up! Mara's mind snapped awake. She scrambled up the ladder to the loft, shaking children awake one by one. While below, Silas grabbed buckets and ran outside. Jonah, help me. Girls, get dressed. Thomas, Abigail, stay with Eliza. No one goes outside until I say. The children obeyed, frightened but trained by months of frontier life to move quickly in emergencies. Mara climbed down, heart hammering, and ran to the window. The chicken coop was engulfed in flames, orange and terrible against the black sky. Silas was throwing water on it, but it was already too late. The structure collapsed inward with a shower of sparks. And that's when Mara saw them. Shadows at the edge of the firelight, men on horseback, watching. One of them raised a hand, waved. Then they disappeared into the darkness. Mara's blood ran cold. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. Silas came back inside, his face grim and soot-streaked. It's gone. Nothing we could do. I saw them, Mara said, her voice shaking. Men on horses. They were watching. Silas's jaw tightened. How many? 3? Maybe 4? Did you recognize any of them? No, but Silas, this was deliberate. I know. He checked his rifle, made sure it was loaded. They're escalating, trying to scare us into leaving. It's working. Silas looked at her. You want to go? Mara looked at the children clustered in the loft, at Jonah standing at the top of the ladder with his father's old revolver, at Eliza holding Abigail, who was crying softly. She thought about running, about packing up and disappearing into the night before something worse happened. Then she thought about Thomas Avery's smile, about how men like him won by making you believe you had no choice but to surrender. No, she said quietly. I'm not running. Not anymore. Silas's expression softened with something like pride. Then we make a stand. How? Tomorrow I ride back to Rock Springs. File charges for arson and intimidation. Get Sheriff Cutler or someone out here to investigate. Make it official. Make it public. The one thing men like Thomas hate is attention. What if they come back tonight? Then they'll find me waiting. Silas checked his second revolver, set it on the table within easy reach. I'm not sleeping anyway. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he couldn't stay awake forever, that he'd collapse from exhaustion. But she saw the steel in his eyes and knew better. So instead, she made coffee, strong and bitter. And she sat with him through the long, tense hours until dawn, watching the valley for shadows that didn't belong. The sun rose on ruins and resolve. And somewhere in the distance, Thomas Avery was learning that some families refuse to break. No matter how hard you pushed, the charred remains of the chicken coop still smoldered when Silas saddled his horse at first light. Mara stood on the porch watching him work, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold morning air. The children were still inside, huddled together in the loft, too frightened to come down. Even Jonah had retreated after keeping watch with Silas through the darkest hours, his young face gray with exhaustion and fear. "How long will you be gone?" Mara asked as Silas checked the saddle cinch one final time. 2 days, maybe 3. Depends on how fast I can get the law moving. He straightened, met her eyes. "I don't want to leave you." "I know, but you have to. John Miller's sending his oldest boy over. Marcus. He'll stay until I get back, help keep watch." "Silas, we'll be fine." "No." His voice was firm. "You won't be alone. Not after last night. I won't risk it." Mara wanted to argue that she could handle herself, that she'd survived worse, that she didn't need protecting. But the smoking ruins behind them told a different story. Thomas Avery had moved beyond threats and intimidation. He'd committed arson, and arson was just the beginning of what desperate, angry men would do. "Be careful," she said instead, stepping off the porch to stand beside him. "Thomas knows you're going to town. He might try something." "Let him try." Silas's hand moved to the revolver at his hip, a gesture so automatic he probably didn't even realize he was doing it. "I'd welcome the excuse." "Don't say that." "Why not? It's true." Mara grabbed his arm, forced him to look at her. "Because I can't lose you. Do you understand? I can't do this alone again. I can't bury another husband. So you be smart, and you be careful, and you come back to me." Something in Silas's expression cracked. He pulled her against him, held her so tight she could barely breathe. "I'll come back. I swear it." "You'd better." Her voice was muffled against his coat. "Because if you die on me, Silas Hawthorne, I will find a way to bring you back just so I can kill you myself." She felt him laugh, a brief rumble in his chest. "Yes, ma'am." They stood like that for another moment, holding each other while the sun climbed higher and the valley woke around them. Then Silas pulled back, kissed her forehead, and swung up into the saddle. "Keep the rifle loaded. Keep the children inside. And if anything at all, feels wrong, you fire 3 shots. The Millers will hear it and come running." "I know." "Mara, I know, Silas. Go. The sooner you leave, the sooner you'll be back." He nodded, turned his horse toward the trail that led out of the valley. But before he rode away, he looked back at her one more time. "I love you." The words hung in the cold morning air, simple and raw and true. Mara's throat closed. In all the weeks they'd been together, through the wedding and the threats and the fire, neither of them had said it, as if speaking it out loud would make them too vulnerable, give fate too much ammunition. But now, with him about to ride into danger, the words came anyway. "I love you too," she whispered. "Come home to me." Silas touched the brim of his hat. Then he was gone, cantering up the trail and over the ridge, leaving Mara alone with 7 frightened children and the acrid smell of smoke. She watched until he disappeared completely. Then she turned back to the cabin, squared her shoulders, and went to face the day ahead. Marcus Miller arrived an hour later, a lanky young man of 19 with his father's honest face and his mother's kind eyes. He carried a rifle that looked older than he was and rode a sturdy sorrel mare that had seen better days. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Pa sent me to help out while Mr. Silas is gone." "Thank you, Marcus. We're grateful for it." "No trouble at all, ma'am. Where do you need me?" Mara gestured toward the smoking ruins. "Can you help clear that away? I don't want the children seeing it any more than necessary." "Yes, ma'am. I'll get right on it." He set to work with quiet efficiency, and Mara went inside to deal with 7 pairs of eyes that had been watching her through the window. "Is Pa Silas coming back?" Thomas asked, his voice small and scared. "Of course he is, sweetheart. He just went to town to talk to the sheriff." "About the bad men who burned our chickens?" "Yes." "Will the sheriff catch them?" Mara knelt down, gathered Thomas and Abigail into her arms. I hope so, baby. I really hope so. But hope, she was learning, was a luxury they couldn't always afford. The day crawled by in tense silence. Mara kept the children busy with chores, mending clothes, churning butter, grinding corn for meal, anything to keep their hands occupied and their minds off the fear that had settled over the cabin like a shroud. Marcus worked outside, clearing debris and keeping watch. Every hour or so, he'd stick his head in to report that all was quiet, that he'd seen nothing suspicious, that they were safe. But Mara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. By late afternoon, her nerves were so taut she jumped at every sound. When a branch cracked in the woods beyond the clearing, she grabbed the rifle and ran to the window, her heart hammering. Nothing. Just trees swaying in the wind. Ma? Jonah appeared at her elbow, his face pale. You okay? Fine. I'm fine. She forced herself to set the rifle down, to unclench her hands. Just jumpy. Me too. He hesitated. Ma? What if they come back tonight? Then Marcus and I will deal with it. I can help. I know how to shoot now. Pa Silas taught me. Mara looked at her son, still so young, trying so hard to be brave. I know you can, sweetheart, but I need you to do something more important. What? If anything happens, I need you to get your brothers and sisters out. Take them through the back window, into the woods. You remember the path Pa Silas showed you? The one that leads to the Miller farm? Jonah's eyes widened. Ma, I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to. Her voice was steel. Your job isn't to fight, Jonah. Your job is to keep them safe. That's what your father would want. That's what I need. Can you do that for me? Jonah's jaw trembled. Then he nodded, once. Yes, ma'am. Good boy. She pulled him close, kissed the top of his head. It won't come to that, but I need to know you're ready, just in case. I'm ready. God, she hoped she was telling the truth. Night fell like a curtain, sudden and complete. Marcus came inside for supper, and Mara fed him along with the children, salt pork and beans and cornbread that tasted like sawdust in her mouth. You should get some rest, ma'am, Marcus said as the children settled into their beds. I'll keep first watch. I won't sleep. Neither will I, but at least try. You look dead on your feet. Mara wanted to argue, but she was exhausted. The night before had been sleepless, and the day had been nothing but tension and dread. Her body was starting to rebel, her hands shaking, her vision blurring at the edges. Wake me in 4 hours, she said finally. We'll trade off. Yes, ma'am. She lay down on the bed, still fully clothed, the rifle within arm's reach. She closed her eyes, listening to Marcus settle into the chair by the door, to the soft breathing of the children in the loft above. She didn't think she'd sleep, but exhaustion pulled her under like a tide. She woke to Marcus shaking her shoulder, his face pale in the lamplight. Mrs. Hawthorne, someone's out there. Mara was on her feet instantly, rifle in hand, heart slamming against her ribs. Where? Edge of the clearing, I heard horses, multiple riders. How many? Can't tell. At least 3, maybe more. Mara moved to the window, peered through the gap in the shutters. At first she saw nothing but darkness. Then, slowly, shapes resolved themselves from the shadows. Men on horseback, sitting just beyond the reach of the lamplight, watching the cabin, waiting. Wake Jonah, Mara said quietly. Tell him to get the children ready, just in case. Yes, ma'am. Marcus moved silently up the ladder while Mara kept watch. Her mind raced. 3 shots to signal for help, but the Millers were 5 miles away. Even if they heard and came running, it would take 30 minutes at least. 30 minutes was an eternity when men with guns were at your door. One of the riders moved forward, closer to the cabin, close enough that Mara could see his face in the spill of lamplight from the window. Not Thomas Avery, one of his hired men from before, the one with the scarred face and dead eyes. He stopped 20 feet from the porch and dismounted slowly, hands visible, making a show of being unarmed. Mrs. Hawthorne! He called out, his voice carrying in the still night air. I'm here to talk. Then talk from where you are, Mara shouted back, keeping the rifle trained on him. Mr. Avery wants to make a deal. I'm not interested in any deals. You sure about that? Because he's willing to be very generous. He'll drop all legal action regarding the children. He'll leave you alone. All he wants is the deed to that Montana property your late husband left you. So that was it. Thomas had finally shown his hand. Tell Mr. Avery, Mara said, her voice ringing clear across the yard, that he can go straight to hell. The man's expression didn't change. That's unfortunate, because Mr. Avery was really hoping you'd be reasonable. I'm done being reasonable. Now get off my land. Can't do that, ma'am. See, Mr. Avery gave me specific instructions. If you won't negotiate, I'm to make things uncomfortable for you until you change your mind. Behind Mara, Marcus cocked his rifle. The sound was loud in the tense silence. The hired man smiled. That's a lot of firepower for a woman and a boy. You really think you can hold us off? I guess we'll find out, Mara said. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the man shook his head, almost sadly. Your choice, ma'am. He turned and walked back to his horse, swung up into the saddle, and then, without warning, he and his companions opened fire. Not at the cabin, at the ground in front of it, at the trees, at the sky. Just noise and chaos and the terrible thunder of gunfire in the dark. The children screamed. Mara ducked instinctively, heart hammering, as bullets tore through the night. Marcus fired back once, twice, but the riders were already pulling back, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as they'd appeared. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. Mara's ears rang. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the rifle. Behind her, the children were crying, and Marcus was reloading with fumbling fingers, his face white as chalk. They're gone, he said, his voice cracking. They wanted to scare us. It worked. Mara set the rifle down carefully before she dropped it. Jonah? Is everyone all right? We're okay, Ma. Jonah's voice came from the loft, steadier than she'd expected. Nobody's hurt. Thank God. Thank God, thank God, thank God. Mara forced herself to breathe, to think. Marcus, fire 3 shots. We need help. Marcus moved to the door, opened it carefully, and fired 3 times into the air. The reports echoed across the valley, sharp and desperate. Then they waited. 20 minutes later, they heard the thunder of approaching horses. Mara's hand went to the rifle again, but then John Miller's voice cut through the darkness. Mrs. Hawthorne, it's John Miller. We're coming in. Relief hit her so hard her knees buckled. She opened the door to find John Miller and 6 other men dismounting, all armed, all grim-faced. What happened? Miller demanded, his gaze sweeping the clearing. Thomas Avery's men. They came to make a deal. When I refused, they... Mara gestured helplessly at the bullet-scarred trees. They wanted to scare us. Miller's expression darkened. Did they hurt anyone? No, but John... Her voice broke. They're not going to stop. Silas went to get the law, but I don't know if it'll be enough. Thomas wants that deed, and he's willing to do anything to get it. Miller was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to his men. Tom, you and Bill stay here. Keep watch until Silas gets back. The rest of you, come with me. We're going to pay Thomas Avery a visit. John, no, Mara said quickly. You can't just... Can't I? Miller's voice was cold. He burned your property, shot at your home with children inside. That's not business, Mrs. Hawthorne. That's war. And if he wants war, we'll damn well give him one. But if you go after him, you'll be no better than... We're not going to hurt him. Miller's smile was thin. We're just going to have a conversation, the kind that makes a man think twice about his choices. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to tell them that violence would only beget more violence, that they needed to wait for Silas, for the law, for something other than vigilante justice. But she was too tired, too scared, too angry. Be careful, she said instead. Miller tipped his hat. Always am, ma'am. He and his men rode out, leaving 2 guards behind. Mara went back inside, gathered her children close, and tried not to think about what Miller was going to do. Tried not to hope that whatever it would finally make Thomas Avery leave them alone. The next morning dawned cold and clear. The guards had seen nothing more overnight, and the valley was peaceful in a way that felt wrong, like the silence before a storm. Mara fed the children a meager breakfast and tried to keep them calm. They were subdued, frightened, jumping at every sound. Even the twins had stopped their usual chatter, sitting close together with their hands entwined. "When's Pa Silas coming back?" Clara asked for the 10th time. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon." But Mara was starting to worry. Silas had been gone more than a day now. What if something had happened to him? What if Thomas had men waiting on the road to Rock Springs? What if... She forced herself to stop. Dwelling on worst-case scenarios wouldn't help anyone. At midday, John Miller returned, alone. Mara met him at the door, her stomach tight with dread. "What happened?" Miller's expression was grim. "Thomas Avery's gone." "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "Packed up and left town this morning. Took his fancy carriage and his hired guns and rode out before dawn. Nobody knows where he went." Mara's mind raced. Why would he leave? After everything he's done? "We had a conversation last night," Miller said carefully. "Me and about 30 other men from the valley. Showed up at his hotel, made it clear that if anything else happened to you or your family, there'd be consequences. Legal and otherwise." "You threatened him." "We explained the situation." Miller's voice was flat. "Turns out Thomas Avery's not nearly as tough as he thinks he is when he's outnumbered 30-1. By the time we left, he was white as a sheet and stammering about how this was all a misunderstanding. So he just ran? Looks that way. My guess? He realized this valley wasn't worth the trouble. Too many people willing to stand up for you. Too much risk of things going public and ruining his reputation. Men like Thomas need to look respectable. We made it clear that wasn't going to happen if he kept pushing." Mara didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Is it really over?" "Think so. But if he comes back, you send word immediately. We'll be ready." "Thank you, John, for everything." Miller nodded, turned to leave, then paused. "Mrs. Hawthorne, what you and Silas have here, it's special. This valley's been dying for years. Too many people leaving, too few staying. But since Silas came, things have been different. People helping each other again, caring. You're part of that now. Don't forget it." He rode away before Mara could respond. She stood on the porch for a long time after he left, trying to process everything that had happened. Thomas Avery was gone. The threat was over. They were safe. It didn't feel real. The next day, Silas finally came home. Mara saw him cresting the ridge and ran to meet him, not caring how it looked, not caring about anything except getting her arms around him. He dismounted before his horse had even stopped moving, caught her up, held her so tight she could barely breathe. "I heard what happened," he said against her hair. "I met Miller on the road. Mara, I'm so sorry. I should have been here. You're here now. That's what matters." He pulled back, studied her face. "Are you all right? Are the children?" "We're fine." "Scared, but fine." "Silas, it's over. Thomas left." Miller and the others scared him off. Something complicated passed across Silas's face. Relief, gratitude, and something that looked almost like regret. "I wanted to be the one to protect you," he said quietly. "You did protect us. You asked for help. You built a community that cared enough to stand up for us when we needed it. That was you, Silas. That was all you." He searched her eyes, looking for the lie, the platitude. But Mara meant every word. "Come inside," she said, taking his hand. "The children have been asking for you non-stop." They walked back to the cabin together, and the moment they stepped through the door, 7 children swarmed Silas like he was a returning war hero. He laughed, tried to answer everyone's questions at once, and finally just scooped up Abigail and Thomas while the others clung to his legs. "I missed you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "All of you." That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Silas sat down with Mara at the table and pulled out more papers. "I filed everything with Judge Thompson, got Sheriff Cutler to open an official investigation into the arson, took statements from everyone who witnessed Thomas's threats." He paused. "And I filed this." He handed her a document. Mara read it slowly, her eyes widening. "You're petitioning to adopt them? Legally adopt all 7 of them?" "If you'll let me. I know they're Daniel's children, and I'm not trying to replace him. But I want to make it official. I want them to have my name, my protection. I want the world to know they're mine. Mara's vision blurred with tears. Silas, you don't have to answer now. Think about it. Talk to the kids if you want. I just... He took her hand. I want us to be a real family. In every way that matters. Mara didn't need to think about it. She'd seen how Jonah looked up to Silas, how Eliza ran to him with scraped knees, how the twins demanded bedtime stories, how Thomas and Abigail called him Pa without prompting. They were already a family. This just made it official. Yes, she said. Yes, let's do it. Silas's face lit up with a smile that transformed him, made him look younger, lighter, like a man who'd finally found his way home after years of wandering. There's one more thing, he said, pulling out a final paper. I officially transferred the cabin and land to both our names. It's ours now, legally. No one can ever take it from us. Mara stared at the deed, her name written right next to his in official legal script. Mara Hawthorne, co-owner, equal partner. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. This is your home as much as mine. More, even. You're the one who's made it feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. Mara couldn't speak, could only lean across the table and kiss him, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. Gratitude and love and the fierce protective pride of a woman who'd found a partner who saw her as an equal. When they finally pulled apart, Silas rested his forehead against hers. We're going to be okay, he murmured. All of us. And for the first time since Daniel died, Mara believed it. The weeks that followed were the most peaceful Mara could remember. Thomas Avery stayed gone. Sheriff Cutler came by once to confirm that the investigation was closed due to lack of evidence. The hired men had disappeared along with Thomas, but assured them that if Avery ever showed his face in the county again, there'd be consequences. The neighbors helped rebuild the chicken coop, bigger and better than before. John Miller's wife, Sarah, brought over 6 laying hens and a rooster. The twins named them all within a day and treated them like pets. Silas expanded the cabin, adding a real bedroom for him and Mara, a second loft for the older children. He built a proper table with benches, shelves for dishes and books, a rocking chair that Mara claimed immediately. The valley slowly transformed from a shelter into a home. One evening in early December, as snow began to fall outside, Jonah approached Silas where he sat carving a wooden toy horse for Thomas. Pa, Silas? Silas looked up. Yeah, son? Can I ask you something? Always. Jonah sat down beside him, his young face serious. Do you think my real pa, would be mad? About you and Ma getting married? About us calling you Pa? Silas set down the carving carefully. Come here. Jonah moved closer and Silas put an arm around his shoulders. Your father loved you. All of you. And I think he'd be grateful that someone's here to take care of you the way he would have if he could. I'm not trying to replace him, Jonah. I couldn't even if I wanted to. But I can promise to love you and protect you the way he would have. Is that enough? Jonah was quiet for a moment, then he nodded, leaning against Silas's side. Yeah, that's enough. Mara, listening from across the room, felt her heart swell until it hurt. Later that night, when the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Silas pulled Mara close on their new bed. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. Mara's stomach tightened. What? When I found you on that road, I was on my way south to Texas, back to where my wife and daughter are buried. I'd been thinking... He swallowed hard. I'd been thinking maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to join them. Mara went very still. Silas? But then I saw you, dragging that wagon, bleeding and broken, but refusing to quit. And something in me just stopped. I couldn't leave you there. And then I couldn't leave you at the creek. And then I couldn't leave you at all. What are you saying? I'm saying you saved my life just as much as I saved yours. Maybe more. He cupped her face in his hands. I was dying, Mara. Just doing it slowly. And you gave me a reason to live again. Tears spilled down Mara's cheeks. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped. If you'd ridden past. I didn't. I couldn't. It's like I was supposed to find you. Like everything I'd been through, losing my family, wandering for years, ending up in this valley, it was all leading me to that exact moment on that exact road. You think it was fate? I think it was Grace. He kissed her softly. You and those kids. You're my second chance, and I'm not going to waste it. Mara held him close, this man who'd appeared in her darkest hour and refused to leave, this man who'd chosen her and her complicated, chaotic, beautiful family. I love you, she whispered. I love you so much it scares me. I know, me too. They lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside and the children breathe softly in the loft. The cabin creaked and settled around them. Familiar now, safe. Home. Spring came slowly to Wyoming that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought warmth and promise and new beginnings. Judge Thompson approved the adoption papers in April. All 7 children officially became Hawthorns. They celebrated with a party that drew half the valley, tables groaning with food, fiddle music, dancing until the stars came out. Jonah, now legally Jonah Hawthorne, stood a little taller, carried himself with more confidence. He'd started helping Silas with the heavier work, learning everything his new father could teach him. Eliza had begun teaching the younger children their letters, using a slate Silas had bought in town. She was patient and kind, with Mara's gift for making lessons feel like play. The twins, Clara and Catherine Hawthorne, were inseparable as ever, wild and free and full of laughter that rang across the valley like bells. Thomas Hawthorne, no longer afraid of shadows, had started following Silas everywhere, asking a million questions about everything. And Abigail, sweet Abigail Hawthorne, had finally started talking again. Real sentences, real thoughts. She bloomed like a flower in the sun, secure and loved and safe. But the biggest change came in May. Mara woke one morning feeling strange. Not sick, exactly. Just different. Her body felt foreign, soft, in new ways, sensitive. It took her 3 weeks to realize what it meant. She told Silas one night after the children were asleep, pulling him outside to the porch where they could talk privately. I'm pregnant. Silas froze. You're what? Pregnant. I'm going to have a baby. Our baby. For a long moment, Silas just stared at her. Then his face crumpled and he pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. Are you sure? Very sure. How do you feel? Terrified. Excited. Happy. She laughed shakily. All of it at once. Silas pulled back, cupped her face. We're having a baby. We're having a baby. He kissed her then, deep and reverent and full of wonder. When they pulled apart, his eyes were wet. I never thought I'd get this chance again, he whispered. After I lost my daughter, I thought that part of my life was over. It's not over, Silas. It's just beginning. They told the children at breakfast the next morning. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. The twins squealed and jumped up and down. Eliza cried happy tears. Jonah grinned like he'd won a prize. Thomas asked if it would be a boy or girl, and Abigail wanted to know if babies liked cookies. We'll find out, Mara said, laughing through her own tears. In about 6 months. That night, Jonah pulled Mara aside while Silas was outside with the younger kids. Ma, this baby, it's going to be a real Hawthorne, right? Not like us. Mara's heart clenched. Jonah, honey, you are a real Hawthorne. All of you are. But we're adopted. This baby will be Pa Silas's actual child. Mara knelt down, took his hands. Listen to me. Family isn't about blood. It's about choice. Pa Silas chose you. He chose all of you. That makes you just as much his children as this baby will be. Do you understand? Jonah's eyes filled. You promise? I promise. And so does your pa. You're his son, Jonah, in every way that matters. Okay. He wiped his eyes roughly. Okay, Ma. She pulled him close. This boy who'd been forced to grow up too fast and whispered against his hair. You're going to be the best big brother. Again. Jonah laughed, the sound watery but real. I've had a lot of practice. The months that followed were full of preparation and anticipation. Silas built a cradle from smooth pine, carved with flowers and birds. The girls sewed baby clothes from scraps of fabric, tiny and perfect. The Valley women came by with advice and gifts and promises to help when the time came. And through it all, Mara watched her family grow and settle and become something permanent, something real. They weren't running anymore. They were home. The baby came in November during the first snowstorm of winter. Mara had been feeling strange all day, restless, uncomfortable, unable to settle. By evening, when the contractions started in earnest, Silas sent Jonah racing through the snow to fetch Sarah Miller and the valley's midwife, Mrs. Henderson. "It's too early," Mara gasped between pains, gripping Silas's hand hard enough to leave marks. "The baby's not due for another 2 weeks." "Babies come when they're ready," Silas said, trying to keep his voice calm even though his face was pale. "You're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine." But his hand shook as he helped her to the bed, as he gathered blankets and water and tried to remember everything he'd learned when his first wife was pregnant. That had been nearly 10 years ago, and he'd been young then, confident in a way he'd never be again. Now he knew too much, knew all the things that could go wrong, knew how fragile life was, how quickly it could slip away. "Silas," Mara's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "Look at me." He met her eyes, saw the fear there, but also the fierce determination that had carried her through everything else. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "You hear me? I'm not leaving you." "You better not," his voice cracked, "because I can't do this without you." "You won't have to." Another contraction hit, and she doubled over, breathing hard. "But you might want to get those kids out of here before I start screaming." Silas looked up to find all 7 children clustered at the edge of the room, watching with wide, frightened eyes. "Eliza," he said, keeping his voice steady, "take everyone up to the loft. Tell them stories. Keep them calm. Can you do that for me?" Eliza nodded, already herding the younger ones toward the ladder. But Jonah hung back, his face pale. "Pa? Is Ma going to be okay?" Silas wanted to lie, wanted to promise everything would be fine. But Jonah deserved honesty. "I hope so, son. I really hope so. Now go on up. Your ma needs quiet." Jonah climbed the ladder slowly, looking back every few steps, and Silas turned his attention back to Mara just as another contraction seized her. Sarah Miller and Mrs. Henderson arrived 20 minutes later, snow-covered and out of breath. Mrs. Henderson, a no-nonsense woman of 60 with hands that had delivered half the babies in the county, took one look at Mara and started barking orders. "Mr. Hawthorne, I need hot water and clean linens. Mrs. Miller, help me get her more comfortable. And someone send those children outside or at least far enough away that they won't hear their mother screaming." "They're in the loft," Silas said, already moving to heat water, "and they're staying there." "Fair enough. Now get me those linens." The next hours blurred together in a haze of pain and fear and desperate prayer. Mara labored through the night while the storm howled outside and the children huddled together above, trying not to listen to their mother's cries. Silas stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her face, murmuring encouragement even when his own heart was hammering with terror. "You're doing so well," he whispered during a brief lull. "So strong. I'm so proud of you." "I'm not strong," Mara gasped. "I'm terrified." Being terrified and doing it anyway, that's the definition of strong. She managed a weak laugh. "Where'd you hear that?" "From you, the day I found you on that road." He kissed her forehead. "You were terrified then too, but you kept going, and you'll keep going now. Promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, if I don't make it, you take care of them, all of them, the baby too." "Mara, don't. Promise me, Silas." He looked into her eyes, saw the fear there, and knew she needed this. Needed to know her children would be safe no matter what. "I promise," he said hoarsely, "but you're going to be fine. You're going to hold this baby and watch it grow up and drive us all crazy. You hear me?" "I hear you." Another contraction hit and she screamed, the sound tearing through the cabin like a physical thing. Mrs. Henderson examined her quickly, efficiently. "Almost there, Mrs. Hawthorne. Just a little longer. You're doing beautifully." But her expression when she looked at Sarah Miller was worried. Silas saw it. His stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" he demanded. "Nothing's wrong." "Don't lie to me. What's wrong?" Mrs. Henderson hesitated, then sighed. "The baby's breech. Feet first instead of head. It's going to be harder, take longer. But I've delivered breech babies before. She just needs to keep her strength up. Mara's face went white. Breech babies die. I've heard the stories. Not on my watch, they don't. Mrs. Henderson's voice was firm. You listen to me, Mrs. Hawthorne. You're young and healthy and strong. This baby is coming, and it's coming out alive. But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that? Mara nodded, tears streaming down her face. Good. Now on the next contraction, I need you to push, hard as you can. What followed was the longest hour of Silas's life. Mara pushed and screamed and bled, while Mrs. Henderson worked with steady, practiced hands. Sarah Miller held Mara's other hand, murmuring encouragement, and Silas prayed harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. Please, please don't take her from me. I can't lose another family. I can't. Then, just when he thought he couldn't bear another second, Mrs. Henderson shouted in triumph. There, I've got the feet. One more push, Mrs. Hawthorne. Just one more. Mara screamed one final time, her voice raw and broken, and suddenly there was a new sound in the cabin. A baby crying. Thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive. It's a girl, Mrs. Henderson announced, holding up a tiny squirming bundle covered in blood and fluid. A perfect little girl. Silas's knees buckled. He caught himself on the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny creature in the midwife's hands, unable to process that this was real, that they'd made it, that Mara was alive and the baby was alive and his family was whole. Mrs. Henderson quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a soft blanket, then placed her in Mara's arms. Mara looked down at her daughter, their daughter, and burst into tears. She's so small, she whispered. So perfect. Silas leaned over, touched one tiny hand with his finger. The baby's fist closed around it reflexively, gripping tight, and something in his chest broke open. She's beautiful, he said, his voice thick, just like her mother. What should we name her? Mara asked, looking up at him with exhausted, joy-filled eyes. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then, Grace. For the grace that brought us together, for the grace that kept us alive. Mara smiled through her tears. Grace Hawthorne. I love it. Above them the loft had gone suspiciously silent. Silas looked up to find 7 faces peering down through the gap in the floorboards. Can we see her? Jonah called down, trying to keep his voice quiet and failing. Can we hold her? The twins chorused. Is she really ours? Thomas asked. Mara laughed, the sound tired but real. Come down. Come meet your sister. They tumbled down the ladder in a controlled chaos, crowding around the bed to stare at the tiny bundle in their mother's arms. Grace had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, making small, snuffling sounds. She's so little, Eliza breathed, like a doll. Can I touch her? Abigail asked, reaching out one tentative finger. Gently, Mara said, guiding her hand to stroke the baby's soft cheek. Very gently. One by one, each child got to touch their new sister, to marvel at her tiny fingers and toes, her wisps of dark hair, the way she yawned and stretched and made small noises like a kitten. Jonah hung back, watching but not reaching out. Silas caught his eye, saw something complicated there. After a while, when the younger children had been shooed back to bed by Sarah Miller and Mrs. Henderson had cleaned up and left with promises to check back tomorrow, Silas found Jonah sitting on the porch despite the cold. What are you doing out here, son? You'll freeze. Jonah shrugged, not looking up. Just needed air. Silas sat down beside him, pulled his coat tighter. You want to talk about it? About what? About whatever's got you sitting out here in a snowstorm instead of inside with your family. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Then, she's really yours, isn't she? Grace? She's your real daughter. And there it was. The fear Mara had tried to address months ago, come back to roost. She's my daughter, Silas said carefully. Just like you're my son. But it's different. She's got your blood, your name. She'll look like you, sound like you. We're just what? Just the kids I chose to love, the ones I fought for, the ones I'd die protecting? Silas turned to face him fully. Jonah, look at me. Reluctantly, the boy met his eyes. When I married your mother, I didn't just marry her. I married all of you. I chose you, every single one of you. And yeah, Grace is my blood, but that doesn't make her more mine than you are. You understand? But what if you start loving her more? What if she becomes your favorite and we're just... Stop. Silas's voice was firm but gentle. That's fear talking. The same fear I had when Grace was being born. The fear that loving someone new means loving someone else less. But it doesn't work that way. Love isn't pie, Jonah. It doesn't get smaller when you divide it up. It gets bigger. How do you know? Because I lived through it. I loved my first daughter more than life itself. When she died, I thought I'd never love anyone that way again. Thought my heart was broken for good. He paused. Then I met you, and Eliza, and the twins, and Thomas, and Abigail, and every single one of you made my heart bigger, made me capable of more love than I ever thought possible. Grace isn't taking anything away from that. She's just adding to it. Jonah's eyes filled with tears. You really mean that? With everything I am. Silas put his arm around the boy's shoulders. You're my son, Jonah. First son. The one who helped me fix that wagon when we barely knew each other. The one who stood beside your mother with a gun when bad men came. The one who's been so brave through everything. That doesn't change because there's a baby in the house now. What if I mess up? What if I'm not a good brother? Then you'll learn, same as me. Silas squeezed his shoulder. We're all figuring this out as we go, son. That's what family is. Making mistakes and forgiving each other and trying again. Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned against Silas's side, just like he'd done that first night by the fire months ago. Pa? Yeah? I'm glad you stopped, that day on the road. I'm glad you didn't just ride past us. Silas's throat closed. Me too, son. Me too. They sat together in the cold and dark, father and son, while inside the cabin a baby slept and a family grew and love kept expanding to fill every corner. The winter that followed was hard, all Wyoming winters were, but the cabin was warm and full of life. Grace thrived, growing plump and healthy on her mother's milk. She had Silas's dark hair and Mara's eyes, and she rarely cried except when hungry or wet. The children doted on her endlessly. Eliza was a natural caretaker, always ready to rock the baby or change her diaper. The twins sang to her constantly, making up elaborate songs about princesses and dragons. Thomas brought her rocks and sticks he thought she'd like. Abigail would sit for hours just watching her sleep. And Jonah, after his conversation with Silas, became the most protective brother imaginable. He built a cradle guard to keep the twins from accidentally dropping toys on the baby. He kept the fire stoked so Grace would never be cold. He even learned to change diapers, though he complained loudly about the smell. Silas watched it all with quiet amazement, this family he'd helped build becoming something solid and real. Some mornings he'd wake up and have to remind himself it wasn't a dream, that these children were really his, that Mara was really his wife, that he'd somehow been given a second chance at everything he'd lost. By spring, Grace was sitting up and babbling, reaching for everything with chubby hands. The valley had survived another winter, and life was settling into something that felt almost normal. Then, on a warm April morning, Sheriff Cutler rode up to the cabin with news. Silas met him in the yard, instantly wary. "Sheriff, what brings you out here?" Cutler dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "Got some information I thought you should know about. Thomas Avery." Mara appeared in the doorway, Grace on her hip. "What about him?" "He's dead." Silence. Absolute silence. "Dead?" Silas repeated. "How?" "Fell off a train platform in Denver. Drunk," witnesses said. "Cracked his skull open on the tracks." Cutler pulled out a paper. "Thing is, before he died, he'd apparently been telling anyone who'd listen about this mining claim in Montana. The one he thought your late husband owned, Mrs. Hawthorne. Turns out he'd borrowed a lot of money against it. Money he couldn't pay back when the lenders finally figured out the mine was worthless." Mara's hand tightened on Grace. "So he died broke?" "Worse than broke. Died owing money to some very unpleasant people. But that's not why I'm here." Cutler handed the paper to Silas. "This came through legal channels. Avery had no other heirs. His entire estate, what little there is after his debts are settled, goes to his late brother's children, your children, Mrs. Hawthorne." Silas read the document quickly. It's not much. Maybe $300 after everything's paid off. That's $300 more than they had yesterday, Cutler said. Thought you should know. After the sheriff left, Silas and Mara stood in the yard, trying to process what they'd just learned. He's really gone, Mara said quietly. The threat. It's really over. Yeah, it is. I should feel something, shouldn't I? Relief? Happiness? Something? Silas put his arm around her. You don't owe him anything, Mara. Not even your feelings. I know. It's just... She looked down at Grace, who was grabbing at her mother's hair and cooing. He could have been part of this. If he'd just let go of his greed, his need to control everything, he could have known these children, could have been family. Instead, he died alone and angry, chasing money that didn't even exist. That was his choice. I know. She leaned against Silas, feeling the solid warmth of him. I'm grateful we made different choices, that we chose love over everything else. Me too. He kissed the top of her head. What do you want to do with the money? Mara thought for a moment. Save it. For the children's future. Maybe Jonah will want to buy land someday. Or maybe Eliza will want to go to teacher's college. Or maybe we'll use it to expand the cabin when Grace gets older and needs her own room. She smiled up at him. We have time to decide. Yeah, we do. They went back inside together, and that night at dinner, Mara told the children about their uncle's death and the small inheritance. The reactions were mixed: sadness that they'd never really known him, relief that he couldn't hurt them anymore, confusion about what it all meant. Does this mean we're rich? Clara asked, eyes wide. No, sweetheart, Mara said, laughing. Just a little less poor, but it means you kids will have some money set aside for when you're older, for education or land or whatever you need. I want a pony, Catherine announced. We'll see about that. After dinner, while the younger children played with Grace on a blanket near the fire, Jonah approached Silas where he sat mending a harness. Pa, can I ask you something? Always. The money, from our uncle. Is it really ours, or does it belong to Ma since she was married to our birth father? Silas set down the harness. According to the law, it belongs to you kids. Daniel's legal heirs. Your mother could hold it in trust until you're of age, but it's yours. So we could give it to you and Ma if we wanted? To help with the farm? You could, but that's not necessary. I want to. Jonah's voice was firm. You and Ma have given us everything. A home, safety, love. This is our chance to give something back. Jonah, you don't owe us anything. I know. That's why I want to do it. He glanced back at his siblings. Can you ask them? If they'd want to share it with you and Ma? I think they would. But it should be everyone's choice. Silas's eyes burned. You're a good man, Jonah Hawthorne. You taught me how to be. Later that night, after all the children had been consulted and had unanimously agreed that the money should go toward improving the farm for everyone, Silas and Mara lay in bed, Grace sleeping in her cradle beside them. They really are extraordinary, aren't they? Mara whispered. Our children. They are, because they learned from the best. We're making it, Silas. Against all odds, we're actually making it. We are. He pulled her closer. Sometimes I think about that day on the road, how close we came to never finding each other, how different everything would be if I'd ridden past, or if you'd already died from exhaustion, or if 100 other things had gone differently. But they didn't. We found each other, and we built this. Yeah, we did. He was quiet for a moment. Mara, do you ever regret it? Marrying me so fast, taking such a huge risk on someone you barely knew? Not once, not even for a second. She turned to face him in the darkness. You saved my life, Silas. In every way a person can be saved. How could I ever regret that? I'm not the man who saved you anymore. I'm just me. Ordinary. Flawed. Sometimes scared out of my mind that I'm doing everything wrong. That's what makes you perfect for me. Because I'm all those things too, and we figure it out together. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, listening to Grace's soft breathing, the crackle of the dying fire, the wind outside that no longer felt threatening. I want to do something, Mara said suddenly. Something to mark this moment, this feeling of finally being safe and whole. Like what? I want to make a sign for above the door, something that says who we are now, not where we came from, but what we've become. Silas smiled in the darkness. What should it say? I don't know. What do you think? He thought for a long moment, then, Hawthorne home, a family by choice. Mara's breath caught. That's perfect. The next day, Silas carved the sign while Jonah helped, the boy learning to use the tools with growing confidence. When it was finished, they painted it together, simple black letters on a smooth pine board sealed against the weather. The whole family gathered for the hanging. Silas and Jonah climbed ladders on either side of the door, while everyone else watched from below, Grace in Eliza's arms, the younger children bouncing with excitement. Ready? Silas called down. Ready? Everyone shouted back. They hammered it in place, solid and permanent above the door that had welcomed them in and kept danger out. When they climbed down, Mara stepped back to look at it properly. Hawthorne home, a family by choice. She started to cry. Ma, why are you crying? Thomas asked, concerned. Because I'm happy, baby. So happy. One by one, the children came to stand beside her, looking up at the sign that declared who they were. Jonah put his arm around Eliza. The twins held hands. Thomas and Abigail pressed close to Mara's sides, and Silas stood behind them all, one hand on his wife's shoulder, one hand on Jonah's, and looked at this family he'd been given and couldn't quite believe his luck. Thank you, he said quietly, to God or fate or whatever force had led him to that road on that desperate afternoon. Thank you. Summer came, warm and gentle. The farm flourished under Silas's careful management and Jonah's growing skill. They planted a larger garden, added more chickens, bought a milk cow that the twins immediately named Buttercup. Grace grew bigger, pulling herself up on furniture, taking wobbly steps that sent everyone into paroxysms of panic and pride. She learned to say Mama and Papa, and all her siblings' names, mangled but recognizable. Neighbors came by regularly now, not just to help but to visit. The Hawthorne cabin had become a gathering place, a symbol of what was possible when people refused to give up. In August, the valley held its first real harvest festival in 5 years. Silas and Mara brought all the children, Grace toddling between them holding both their hands. There was music and dancing and more food than they'd seen in one place since leaving civilization. John Miller found Silas by the drink table and clapped him on the shoulder. Good turnout. Best I've seen, Silas agreed. That's because of you, you know. What you and Mara did, surviving Thomas Avery, building a home, showing everyone else it was possible. It gave people hope. Gave them a reason to stay instead of leaving. We didn't do anything special. You did. You loved each other, loved those kids, helped your neighbors. That's everything. Miller's expression grew serious. I heard talk in town. They want to build a school, first one in the valley. They want Mara to teach. Silas looked across the field to where Mara sat with the children, Grace in her lap, laughing at something Eliza was saying. She'd love that. She was a teacher before, you know, back in Ohio. I know, that's why we're asking. What do you think? I think you should ask her, but I think she'll say yes. Miller did ask that very afternoon, and Mara, eyes shining with joy, said yes before he even finished the question. The school was built that fall, a small one-room structure on the Miller farm. Mara started teaching in October, with 15 students ranging from 6 to 14. Eliza and the twins attended, soaking up knowledge like desert soil, soaking up rain. Jonah was technically old enough to stop, but he came anyway, sitting in the back and helping the younger children with their lessons. Silas would ride over at midday sometimes, bringing Mara lunch, staying to watch her teach. She was luminous in front of that classroom, patient and passionate and utterly in her element. This was what she'd been meant to do before life had derailed her plans. Now she'd found her way back. Winter came again, their second as a family. This one was easier. They were prepared now, with more food stored, more wood cut, more blankets and warm clothes. The cabin had been expanded enough that no one felt cramped. Grace had her own little corner. The older children had more space in the loft. They were comfortable. Not rich, never that, but comfortable. Safe. Loved. On Christmas morning, Silas woke early to start the fire and found Mara already awake, sitting in the rocking chair with Grace asleep in her arms. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. "Didn't want to. I wanted to watch them." She gestured to the loft where 7 children slept peacefully. "Sometimes I wake up and I'm afraid this is all a dream, that I'll open my eyes and find myself back on that road, dragging that wagon, losing everything." Silas knelt beside her chair, took her free hand. "It's not a dream. This is real. We're real." "I know, but Silas, when I think about how close we came, if you'd ridden past, if I'd died before you found me, if Thomas had succeeded in taking the children—" She shook her head. "We shouldn't be here. By all rights, we should have failed. But we didn't, and you want to know why?" "Why?" "Because you refused to quit. Because even when you had every reason to lie down and die, you kept going. That's not luck, Mara. That's who you are." He touched Grace's soft hair. "And now look at what we've built. 8 children, a home, a community, a life worth living. All because you wouldn't give up." Mara leaned down, kissed him softly. "We wouldn't give up. You're part of this story, too. I'm the lucky bastard who got to be there when you needed someone. You're more than that." She settled back in the chair, adjusting Grace's weight. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. To all of us." Above them, the children began to stir, excited whispers floating down as they realized it was Christmas morning. Within minutes, the cabin was chaos. Children tumbling down the ladder, exclaiming over the small gifts Silas and Mara had managed to scrape together, laughing and playing and filling every corner with joy. Silas stood back, watching it all, and felt something he'd thought he'd never feel again. Peace. Not the absence of problems. They still had those. Money was still tight. Winters were still hard. Life on the frontier was never easy. But he had a family. He had love. He had purpose. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Spring came once more, and with it, Mara's announcement that she was pregnant again. The children were thrilled. Grace was just over a year old and already running everywhere on sturdy legs. The thought of another baby sent everyone into a frenzy of preparation. "We're going to need a bigger cabin," Jonah said, looking around at their already crowded space. "Already planning it," Silas assured him. "This summer, we'll add another room. Maybe 2. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 3 months into the pregnancy, Mara woke in the middle of the night with terrible cramping. By morning, she'd lost the baby. The grief was immediate and crushing. Mara lay in bed for 2 days, barely speaking, while Silas and Eliza managed the household and tried to keep the younger children from understanding what had happened. On the 3rd day, Silas sat beside her and simply held her while she cried. "I couldn't keep it," she sobbed against his chest. "I couldn't even keep it safe for 3 months. What kind of mother—" "Stop. This wasn't your fault." "How do you know?" "Because Mrs. Henderson said so. Because these things happen, and they're no one's fault. Because you're the strongest woman I know, and if you could have saved this baby, you would have." Mara cried until she had no tears left. Then she lay exhausted in Silas's arms and whispered, "I wanted to give you more children. I have children. I have Grace. I have 7 others who are just as much mine as if I'd fathered them myself. You've already given me more than I ever dreamed of having. But no buts. I'm not disappointed. I'm not angry. I'm just sad for you, because I know this hurts. But Mara, we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this the way we've gotten through everything else. Together." It took time. Weeks of Mara moving through the days like a ghost, going through the motions but not really living. The children tried to help, bringing her flowers and drawings, and sitting quietly beside her when she couldn't bear talking. And slowly, gradually, she came back to herself. She went back to teaching, threw herself into her work with renewed passion, pouring all her grief and love into these children who needed her. She held Grace closer, longer, grateful for the daughter she did have. And she let Silas hold her at night, anchor her, remind her that she was loved even when she felt broken. By summer, the acute grief had faded to a dull ache she could live with. She and Silas talked about trying again, decided to wait. To enjoy what they had without reaching for more. "We have enough," Mara said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the children play. More than enough. We do, Silas agreed. We really do. And it was true. The years that followed were good ones. Not perfect. Life never was. But good. Jonah grew into a strong, capable young man, taking on more and more responsibility on the farm. At 16, he started courting Emma Cooper, Martha's granddaughter, a smart girl with a quick laugh who fit into the family like she'd always been there. Eliza became Mara's teaching assistant, showing a natural gift for education that made everyone certain she'd run her own school someday. The twins grew into beautiful young women, still inseparable, still filling the house with music and laughter. Thomas developed a passion for animals, spending hours caring for their expanding menagerie of chickens, cows, and the pony he'd finally convinced Silas to buy. Abigail, quiet Abigail, discovered a talent for sewing and spent her free time creating beautiful quilts and clothes for the family. And Grace, sweet Grace, grew up surrounded by love and siblings and parents who'd fought heaven and earth to build a safe place for her to be born into. 5 years after that first desperate meeting on the road, Silas and Mara stood on their porch at sunset, watching their family gather for dinner. The cabin had been expanded twice now, a sprawling structure that barely resembled the tiny shelter Silas had first brought them to. Above the door, weathered but still proud, hung the sign, Hawthorne Home, a family by choice. Do you ever think about it? Mara asked, leaning against Silas's side. That day on the road? Every day, Silas admitted. I think about how I almost didn't stop, how I was planning to keep riding south, maybe all the way to Texas, how close I came to missing all of this. What made you stop? Silas was quiet for a moment, remembering. The woman dragging a broken wagon, 7 children crying, the sheer impossible courage of refusing to quit even when quitting would have been easier. I saw myself in you, he said finally. Saw what I looked like after I lost my first family, desperate, broken, but somehow still fighting. And I thought, if someone had stopped for me back then, maybe I wouldn't have spent 8 years wandering. Maybe I would have found home sooner. He looked down at her. So I stopped. For the man I used to be. For the woman you were. For the children who needed someone. And now? Mara asked softly. Now I'm grateful every single day that I made that choice. He pulled her closer. You saved me too, you know, just as much as I saved you. How? You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to build instead of just survive, a reason to believe I deserved a second chance. His voice was rough with emotion. You and these children, you're my second chance, Mara, and I'm not going to waste a single day of it. Mara turned in his arms, looked up at this man who'd appeared in her darkest hour and refused to leave. This man who'd chosen her chaos and her children and her complicated, beautiful life. I love you, Silas Hawthorne. I love you too, Mara Hawthorne. They kissed as the sun set behind them, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. Inside the cabin, someone called them for dinner. Grace's laugh rang out, clear and bright. Jonah was teasing the twins about something. Eliza was scolding Thomas for trying to sneak a piece of bread before the blessing. Normal, ordinary, perfect. Later that night, after dinner had been eaten and dishes washed and children tucked into bed, Mara sat at the table with her journal, a habit she'd started that first year, recording their story so the children would someday know where they came from and what they'd overcome. She wrote about the road, the wagon. The moment she'd looked up and seen a man on horseback watching her with quiet, steady eyes. She wrote about fear and hope, grief and joy, endings and beginnings. She wrote about how sometimes salvation comes in the form of a stranger who becomes family, how love is something you choose every single day, how home isn't a place, but the people who refuse to let you fall. And then she closed the journal, set down her pen, and went to bed beside her husband. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the valley. The sign above the door creaked gently on its hooks. And inside the Hawthorne home, a family slept peacefully, dreaming of tomorrow. Because for the first time in a long, brutal life, no one was running anymore. They were home. And home was exactly where they belonged,